They knew she was one also. But the class had the good manners that come with not caring, and they would leave the impostors alone. The question, however, would have caused at least 10 of them to stop poking at each other, 6 to forget about eating, and 3 others to find the need for drink suddenly less urgent. It caused Claudia to want to embalm Jamie in a vat of mummy liquid right that minute. That would teach him inconspicuous. The guide told Jamie that some people saved all their lives so they could become mummies. It was indeed expensive. One of the students called out, "You might even say it cost him his life." Everyone laughed. They then picked up their rubber mats and walked to the next room. Claudia was ready to pull Jamie out of line and make him learn another part of the museum today, but she got a glimpse of the room they were to go to next. It was filled with jewelry, case after case of it. So they followed the class into the hall. After a short talk there, the guide bid them goodbye and mentioned that they might enjoy buying some of the museum pamphlets on Egypt. Jamie asked if they were expensive. The guide answered, "Some are as expensive as a copy of the Sunday New York Times. Others cost much more." Jamie looked over at Claudia. He shouldn't have. Claudia looked as satisfied as the bronze statue of the Egyptian cat she was standing near. The only real difference between them was the cat wore tiny gold earrings and looked a trifle less smug. They got to the New York Times the next day. Neither Claudia nor Jamie bought it. The man who left it on the counter while he was looking at the reproductions of antique jewelry bought it. The Kincaids stole it from him. They left the museum immediately thereafter. Claudia read the paper while they ate breakfast at Horn and Hard Arts. That morning, she didn't eat breakfast food for breakfast. Crackers and roasted chestnuts in bed at night satisfied only a small corner of her hunger. Being hungry was the most inconvenient part of running away. She meant to eat heartily for every cent Jamie gave her. She bought macaroni and cheese casserole, baked beans, and coffee that morning. Jamie got the same. The information they wanted was the first page of the second section of the Times. The headline said, "Record Crowd Views Museum Bargain." There were 3 pictures, one of the record crowd standing in line, one of the statue itself, and one of the director of the museum with an assistant. The article was as follows. "Saxonburg, you can find an original of the newspaper in my files. It is in one of the 17 cabinets that line the north wall of my office." Officials of the Metropolitan Museum of Art report that 100,000 people climbed the Great Stairway to catch a glimpse of one of its newest acquisitions, a 24-inch statue called Angel. Interest in the marble piece arises from the unusual circumstances attending its acquisition by the museum, and from the belief that it may be the work of the Italian Renaissance master, Michelangelo. If proof is found that it is an early work of Michelangelo, the museum will have purchased the greatest bargain in art history. It was purchased at an auction last year for $225. Considering that recent Prince Franz Joseph II accepted an offer of $5 million for a small painting of Leonardo da Vinci, an artist of the same period and of similar merit will give some idea of how great a bargain this is. The museum purchased the statue last year when one of its curators spotted it during a preview showing of works to be auctioned by the Park Burnett Galleries. His initial suspicion that it might be the work of Michelangelo was confirmed by several other museum officials, all of whom kept their thoughts quiet in the successful effort to keep the bidding from being driven higher. The statue has been the subject of exhaustive tests and study by the museum staff as well as art experts from abroad. Most believe it to have been done about 470 years ago when Michelangelo was in his early 20s. The statue was acquired by the Park Burnett Galleries from the collection of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. She claims to have purchased it from a dealer in Bologna, Italy, before World War II. Mrs. Frankweiler's residence on East 63rd Street was long as Manhattan's showplace for what many considered one of the finest private collections of art in the Western Hemisphere. Others considered it a gigantic hodgepodge of the great and the mediocre. Mrs. Frankweiler closed her Manhattan residence 3 years ago. Important pieces from its contents have found their way to various auctions and galleries since that time. Mrs. Frankweiler amassed a fortune from the corn oil industry and from developing many corn products. Mr. Frankweiler amassed a fortune from the corn industry and from developing many corn products. He died in 1947. Mrs. Frankweiler now lives on her country estate in Farmington, Connecticut. Her home, which at one time was open to the greats in the worlds of art, business, and politics, is now closed to all but her staff, her advisors, and a few close friends. The Frankweilers had no children. A museum spokesman said yesterday, "Whether or not conclusive proof will be found that this was the work of Michelangelo, we are pleased with our purchase." Although Michelangelo Buonarroti is perhaps best known for his paintings of the Sistine Chapel in Rome, he always considered himself a sculptor, and primarily a sculptor of marble. The question of whether the museum has acquired one of his lesser-known masterpieces still awaits a final answer. If Claudia's interest had been a little broader, if she had started with the national news on page 21 and then read the continuations on page 28, she might have noticed a small article on that page, one column wide, that would have interested her. The dateline was Greenwich, Connecticut, and it stated that 2 children of Mr. and Mrs. C. Kincaid, Sr. had been missing since Wednesday. The article didn't mention any clues like Claudia's letter. It said that the children were last seen wearing nylon-quilted ski jackets. Small help. 14 out of 15 kids in the USA wear those. It went on to describe Claudia as brunette and pretty and Jamie as brunette and brown-eyed. Police in the neighboring towns of Darien and Stamford in Connecticut and Port Chester, New York had been alerted. You see, Saxonburg, Claudia had found the article about the statue too easily. She didn't even look at the first section of the paper. I keep telling you that often the search proves more profitable than the goal. Keep that in mind when you're looking for something in my files. Claudia and Jamie read about the statue with great interest. Claudia read the article twice so that she could memorize it. She decided that the statue was not only the most beautiful in the world, but also the most mysterious. Jamie said, "I don't think $225 is cheap. I've never had that much money in my whole life. Totaling up all my birthday and Christmas presents since I was born 9 long years ago wouldn't make $225. Claudia said, "You wouldn't consider 2 1/4 cents very much, would you?" Jamie answered, "I might." "That's right, you might, but most people wouldn't." "Well, if the statue is by Michelangelo, it's worth about $2,250,000 instead of $225. That's the same as saying that suddenly 2 1/4 cents is worth $225. Jamie thought this over a minute. He was impressed. "When I grow up, I'm going to find a way to know for certain who did a statue." This was all Claudia needed. Something that had been smoldering inside of her since she first saw the statue, that had been fed by the Times article, now flared into an idea. "Jamie, let's do it now. Let's skip learning everything about everything in the museum. Let's concentrate on the statue." "Can we still take class tours as we did yesterday?" Claudia answered, "Of course. We don't have to skip learning something about everything. We just won't learn everything about everything. We'll concentrate on Michelangelo." Jamie snapped his fingers. "I've got it," he exclaimed. He held up his hands for Claudia to see. "What does that mean?" "Fingerprints, silly. If Michelangelo worked on that statue, his fingerprints would be on it." "Fingerprints? Almost 500-year-old fingerprints? How would you know that they belonged to Michelangelo?" "He didn't have a police record." "I don't suppose he did. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure people were fingerprinted in those days, even if they did." "And what if we were to find identical fingerprints on something they knew that he did? We could compare them." Claudia kept looking at the picture of the statue as she finished eating her baked beans. "Jamie," she said, "do you think the statue looks like anyone special?" She folded her arms and gazed into the distance. "No one I know looks like an angel." "Think a minute." She cleared her throat and lifted her chin slightly and gazed into the distance. "Don't think about the hairstyle or the clothes or anything. Just think about the face." She nudged the page of the New York Times closer under Jamie's nose and resumed her pose. Jamie looked at the picture. "Nope," he said up. "Can't see any resemblance." "Nope," He looked at the picture again. Who do you think it looks like? Oh, I don't know, she stammered. Jamie noticed Claudia blushing. What's the matter? You getting a fever? Don't be silly. I just feel like the statue looks like someone in our family. You sure you don't have a fever? You're talking out of your head. Claudia unfolded her arms and lowered her distant gaze. I wonder who posed for it, she said half out loud. Probably some fat old lady. Then the chisel slipped, so we made her a skinny angel instead. Jamie, you have so much romance in you as much romance in you as the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood. Romance? Baloney! But I do like the mystery part. So do I, Claudia answered. But I like more than that about Angel. We going to look for fingerprints then? Claudia reconsidered. Well, we might look for fingerprints, that's one way, for a start. She looked at Jamie and sniffed. But I'm sure it won't work. We'll look tomorrow. Even though it won't work. And she looked some more at the picture. On the second day, the crowd going on up the broad staircase to see the little angel was even greater. The newspaper article had made people curious. Besides, it was a cloudy day, and museum attendance always improves in bad weather. Some people had not been in the Metropolitan Museum for years came. Some people who had never been there ever came. They got directions from maps, subway conductors, and police. I'm surprised, Saxenberg, that seeing my name in the paper in connection with Michelangelo didn't bring even you to the museum. You would have profited more than you would have thought by that trip. Are photo albums of your grandchildren the only pictures you look at? Are you altogether unconscious of the magic of the name of Michelangelo? I truly believe that his name has magic even now, the best kind of magic, because it comes from true greatness. Claudia sensed it as she again stood in line. The mystery only intrigued her. The magic trapped her. Both children were annoyed when the guards, plus the push of the people, hurried them past the angel. How could they possibly look for fingerprints when they were so rushed? After this hurried visit to the statue, they decided to do their research, when they had the statue and the museums to themselves. Claudia especially wanted to make herself important to the statue. She would solve its mystery, and it, in turn, would do something important to her, though what this was she didn't quite know. As they once again reached the back stairs, Claudia asked Jamie, With whom shall we dine today, Sir James? Jamie answered, Oh, I don't know, dear Lady Claudia. Shall we find a good and proper group? Yes, let us, Sir James. Thereupon Jamie held out his arm. Claudia rested the tips of her fingers on the top of his hand, and they descended the stairs. They proved to be as fussy in their selection as Goldilocks. This group was too old, that group too young, this too small, that all girls. But they found a good and proper group in the American wing where they had spent a lovely and informative hour and a half learning about the arts and crafts of colonial days. They dined with the group, staying always at the rear of the line, always slightly apart. Both Jamie and Claudia had acquired a talent for being near but never part of a group. Some people, Saxenberg, never learned to do that all their lives, and some learn to do it all too well. And that's the end of chapter 5. At the end of chapter 4, I'll come back with chapter 5 tomorrow.